Wishing health to you, dear friends. Today is the last day of vacation, and I have also decided to dedicate it to one of the clients from my past life, a civilian. So, what problem do we have here? The problem is that the satellite converter is not working. This satellite converter, had problems with it even during the last visit. It was even a bit warm, heating up, but everything was working. I didn't have the satellite converter, so I left everything as it was. I just moved from the roof. Everything was working, but the next day it was working again. I was no longer able to access this roof, and for about a year and a half, the clients were without this satellite converter. I also draw your attention to this 36 degrees, 36. This is the inverter converter. Do you see what happened? Like this. So now I am replacing the satellite converter. And for a moment, I will also philosophize a bit about my civilian profession. Oh, I really loved objects with such roofs, old ones. Why? Because that roof was difficult to install the antenna. I always tried to install not in the smoke code, but I tried to set up the mast separately. I was installing it, and it needed to be placed right on the ridge so that water would not run off. A little metal sheet with the slate, but that doesn't help. It needs to be installed as high as possible on the ridge. I installed it about 10 years ago. 10 years ago there was foam here, and then everything was covered with resin. Currently, due to the action of ultraviolet rays, it has all crumbled, and it needs to be updated. So these roofs were good. Such projects were more complex, which is why they paid better. It was profitable to take on such a project because it cost quite a bit. It's not interesting anymore. It's a bit harder for me to climb on such roofs now. Considering the financial situation in the country, it is undesirable, unachievable, and necessary for the client. I want to emphasize taking the necessary amount from the client, because right now it's the opposite. This is a passive. I will also tell you a very interesting story. These wires are part of the main line of the radio broadcasting network of the so-called Lyre. So, about 3 to 4 years ago, the client called me to this roof. As you can see, the mast is cut down. The mast itself is no longer there. The mast has already been dismantled. It used to stand over there. So, the mast had already collapsed from old age, rotted away, and these wires were standing a little higher than they are lying now. Now, they are lying on the slate, whereas before they were right above the slate, and it was impossible to pass through. Despite the fact that I am actually an electrical engineer, I found myself here like a boy. I took one wire with one hand, and the other wire with the other hand, in order to squeeze between the wires. I somehow thought that this line could not be energized because it was already in an emergency state and could not be working anymore. And that was my mistake. I was caught off guard quite well. Then my muscles, they were affected, how should I put it, by the action of electric current. My muscles went into spasm, and I couldn't tear my hands away from those wires. I seemed tense, started shouting, but let's be realistic. No one here would have helped me anyway. I was left here alone with this problem, literally for 1 or 2 seconds. But I immediately understood what had happened to me, thank God, and I immediately realized how I needed to act. I need to detach as quickly as possible. I got stuck on this wire and started to spin. To relax, I don't know how, like a worm on a fishing hook, as quickly as possible. And somewhere around the 5th movement, I managed to tear my hand away. I don't know how much time passed. It was a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I detached one hand from the wire and slid down the slate a little. In any case, if I had stayed on the wires, If I had fallen to the very bottom, I would have fallen from the 4th floor. I think I wouldn't have been saved in any case. Anyway, the guy would have rushed over, well, maybe in about 15-20 minutes, came to me, would have shouted, and then called the emergency rescuers. By the time they arrived, I had no chances left. I will say this, thank God, that I managed to pull my hands away from that drop and stayed alive. This was a lesson for me, and I want to share it. I have a bitter experience, and want to warn you not to make the same mistakes as I did. Right now, I will change this satellite converter, check the signal, and it seems like it won't settle down, just creaking from the CRM.